All right, everyone. Welcome to episode 1 of If This Canvas Could Talk with Amber Jordan and my guest today, Miss Anna Halza.
Hi.
We're having some technical difficulties, but we're going to figure this out. We're going to get it. So forgive us if we don't get it right the first time. But as we are figuring things out, hopefully you can keep up. So Anna, kind of explain where we are and what in the world is going on in the world today. So where are we at this moment in time?
Like literally?
Literally, like where are we?
So we're sitting in my mother's closet, staring at a laptop, trying to make this thing happen with art and such. So basically how this thing is going to work is you're going to be like telling me the story, right? Which I know kind of about, but not really.
Okay.
And I'm just the listener and commenter. That's going to be great.
You're just along for the ride,
right? Yeah.
Okay. So, well, my goal with this was I teach art for a living. And sometimes when you're in the classroom, there's a lot of great stories that you just can't get to. And if you can get to them, you have to censor them in a way. You can't tell all the things that you would like to tell because you're in a school setting. And, you know, some things are just not appropriate either for the age group or for school at all. But my goal with this is for the everyday person that when they go to an art museum and they're walking around, they might know a little bit about art history, or they might recognize some of the famous paintings that they see. But they don't necessarily know the stories behind those paintings. So my goal with this podcast, video, whatever this evolves to be, is to take some of those paintings and reveal the stories behind them. There's some really interesting stories that inspired these artists to create the paintings to begin with. So that's where we're going to start today. We are going to start with one of my favorites. When I first mentioned this to Anna, she kind of gasped. She rolled her eyes and said, "Oh, Mom," she's like, "You know, there's a pandemic going on, right?" She wasn't quite sure if this was an appropriate choice for the world today. But as I researched it more and I thought about it, I realized that this is one of the perfect stories to tell during this kind of time. It's a message of hope, and it's a message of triumph. And it's something that inspired an artist to not only take his emotions to paint, but he also created an entire political movement with his art. So are you ready to get into it, Anna?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
All right. Are you sure? All right. So again, this is If This Canvas Could Talk, episode 1. And our first painting that we are going to cover today is the story of the trip to Senegal, better known as the Raft of Medusa by Theodore Gericault.
Ooh.
All right. I'm actually not going to show the painting.
What? Why?
Oh, no, I am. Just not yet. I don't want you guys to look at the painting yet. I want you to just kind of listen to the story behind it. You've probably seen this painting before. It actually first came out, its original name was called The Shipwreck. Gericault didn't want to name it the Raft of Medusa because he knew right away when he exhibited at the Salon in Paris that people might be offended by his painting. So he just simply named it The Shipwreck, and he hoped that his viewers would figure it out. All right, so let's go back and let's figure out why Gericault was so inspired to paint this to begin with. So if you've heard this story before, you probably know the majority of it, but I'm actually going to go a little bit further and go into what actually inspired Gericault to paint this to begin with. So there was this painting is based on a real life event. Anna, do you happen to know what year this happened? Do you remember? You've heard this story. You've heard bits and pieces of this before. Do you remember what year it was?
How would I remember that? I can't even remember what day it is today. I don't know. Is it like 1972?
Oh, dear child. So close. Okay. So this story takes place in 1816. The events are true. So this was a real shipwreck that happened in 1816, and it inspired Gericault. So the Medusa is the name of the ship. It was the flagship of a convoy carrying settlers to reestablish a French colony at Senegal. This flagship was actually part of a fleet, and I didn't really understand this at first when I kind of first started telling this story and teaching this in class. For some reason, I thought it was just a single ship, but that's actually not true. It was an entire fleet of ships that took part on this little voyage, this adventure to the new land. And that's something that is new to me that I didn't really understand until I started researching further. So to do my research, what I used for the majority of it is from Gutenberg.org. If you're not familiar with that, it's basically ebooks that are available for free. They're available to be shared. You can, copy different parts of it. It's available to the public just kind of as just a way to get the information, out into the public. So the information that Gericault used was a narrative that was written by two of the survivors of this shipwreck. So what we have to start our scene is we have a fleet of ships that are going off on their voyage to Senegal. So the French settlements were kind of off the western coast of Africa from Cape Blanco to the mouth of the River Gambia. They've been alternately possessed by both France and England, but they remained mostly in the hands of the French. So this is basically a fleet of ships, French ships, that are going down to help start these colonies. On the ship, so there's three main ships. So the Medusa is the largest, and then there's two smaller ones. And I didn't realize that is when I first learned this story. There's actually two smaller ones that went with the Medusa. But as all things, the Medusa was kind of had a bad fate from day one.
Well, I mean, they did name it the Medusa.
Yes, as Anna says, the Medusa. I don't know. They probably made it on themselves, I guess, with a name like that. Probably wasn't the best decision.
Yeah.
So the other one, let's see if I can remember the name of the other two ships. I remember the type. One is a Corvette. That's all I can remember. It's a Corvette. Okay. No, I don't have the names right now. But let's talk about the different types of people that were going onto this ship. So they basically had a small army. But this army was kind of an interesting one. It wasn't, let's say, the best of the best, the most upright citizens. These were actually people that were former prisoners.
Ooh, fun.
Yeah, they were not, because who would sign up, on purpose to go on a voyage and settle a new colony? Some of it was not necessarily something that people would jump to go and do. But so this army was a little bit kind of different to begin with. So they're not the most honorable people that composed of this army. But so we have a lieutenant colonel who was to command in chief for the king on the whole coast from Cape Blanco to the mouth of the River Gambia, and charged with the superior direction of the administration. So basically, this colonel he's all powerful. He's basically the king. He can make the decisions for all the different boats and for all the people. There's a lieutenant colonel. We also have a company of 84 men each. Artillery, lieutenant artillery, there are 11 of those. We have an inspector we have 4 storekeepers, 6 clerks, 4 scouts, 2 chefs, 2 schoolmasters, 2 writers. So they are basically kind of like a notary. 2 hospital directors, 2 apothecaries, 5 surgeons, 2 port captains, 3 pilots, a gardener, 8 women, 8 children, 4 bakers, father for an intended exhibition into the country of Galam, an engineer of mines, a geographical engineer, a naturalist, father for an expedition which was to seek upon Cape Verde or in its neighborhood for a spot proper for the foundation of a colony. So basically, another leader for these other expeditions that were going to take place in the colonies once they landed and got there. So they had a physician for that, an agriculturist for European productions, an agriculturalist for colonial productions, 2 geographical engineers, a naturalist, an officer of the Marine, 20 workmen, and 3 women. So there was a total of 365. So this was the entire expedition, where 365 people. Out of that 365, 240 were on board the Medusa.
I feel like that's a really like random assortment of people.
Random assortment of people?
I mean, like, it's good that they have like all the different kinds of people, I guess.
Right.
But I mean, I don't know.
Well, yeah, it is interesting. So there's 18 women that were supposed to stay kind of in the first spot, and there's children, which surprised me. I didn't realize when I first, learned about the Medusa. I never realized that children were on board. I guess I kind of thought of all sailors. It never occurred to me that there were, families going to start.
Well, I mean, it's a colony. Like on the Mayflower, they had
whole groups of people.
Stuff. Yeah,
that's a good point. Yeah, I guess I never thought about that. So,
yeah.
Okay, so that's the scene. So we have this group that's going off to the new colonies. They're on 3 different ships, the Medusa being the largest. Well, the captain of the Medusa was a character all on his own. He actually had not been the captain for about 20 years. And he was close to the king, and he kind of called in a favor for the king and said, hey, why don't you let me take one of your ships and be the captain to go down to this colony. So he really wasn't fit for the job. He hadn't seen the open sea, in 20 years, and he didn't have a lot of experience actually on the sea before that time. So what he did was he was relying heavily on 2 of his lieutenants. And once again, they're young and experienced, and they didn't have a lot of time actually out on the open sea. They didn't have a lot of experience navigating, and they really just were not qualified to be running such a large sea vessel. One of his other people that the captain relied on was actually a ex-British prisoner.
Ooh, he sounds like a fun guy.
Yeah, and he had just gotten out of prison. He was in prison for 10 years. So again, he hasn't seen a boat.
Okay.
But for some reason, the captain would ask him first before he made any decisions. He wanted to know, his opinion on things before he made any decision. It was basically like he couldn't make a decision on his own, so he put his faith and his trust in these other 3 people that were also not qualified.
Go ahead. Trust the ex-con. What's the worst that could happen, right?
What could happen? Ex-convict, haven't been out on the ocean in 20 years. What could go wrong?
Just sounds perfect to me, man.
Sounds great. So
sign me up.
So the Medusa actually got out ahead of the other 2 boats. It was, it had larger sails, so it basically picked up speed and got ahead of the other boats. The Echo was the second boat. It did catch up with them at their first port at St. Croix. But unfortunately, the Medusa strip got off to a very rocky start. So they actually hadn't been gone very long. And one of the first things that happened on this boat was they were all excited. So they've just taken off. They're going on this new adventure, and everybody's out, on the deck, and they're looking out over the sea, and there's dolphins out in the water. And so, of course, you could imagine the joy and the thrill of this new adventure, and they're on their way. And one of the sailors was a young 15-year-old boy.
Ooh.
And in his excitement, he was looking through a porthole on the top deck, and he actually fell through the porthole when he was looking at these dolphins and fell down into the water below. Obviously, this caused a lot of panic and chaos, and so they threw a lifeboat overboard, and they actually got a rope down to the boy, and the boy got a hold of the rope, and then he was actually able to grasp the hand of one of the other sailors.
Right.
But then that sailor realized that the boy was going to pull him overboard too, and so he let go.
So he let the boy go?
He let go.
Oh my gosh.
And then the boy, of course, he couldn't swim, and he was not able to get to the lifeboat. So this is like their first part of their journey. They had
great omens.
They
great
hadn't
omens.
they hadn't even gotten very far, and they've already had a tragedy on the sea. So
Oh,
this was the
lovely.
very beginning of their adventure. And so obviously the mood kind of mellowed from this point on, and they realized, well, wait a second, our lives are at stake here. This is dangerous. This isn't just looking at dolphins for fun. This is a dangerous situation. We could die here. So the mood on the Medusa quickly changed after this tragedy, after the boy fell into the ocean.
Oh my gosh.
So they make it to their next port at St. Croix. The Echo actually rejoined them. They were able to get a couple more supplies at this point. And that's another important thing to mention is the leader, the captain, had a little bit of an ego. As captains do. And so as they're gathering supplies, he actually had one supply in particular that they wanted more of. Any guesses of what that would be, Anna?
I have no idea.
You have no idea?
Beer, wine.
Ah, ding, ding, ding.
Alcohol. Woo!
Yes, so as any good sailor, the captain actually had more barrels of wine than water.
This guy sounds great.
They're going well.
Oh, I'm so excited.
And so the other thing that they brought with them was flour, but the flour wasn't for them to eat. The flour was actually a commodity. That was something that they were bringing to this new colony. It really was of no purpose for them on their voyage. So they stopped at St. Croix. They got some more supplies, more of the fresh fruits and vegetables from there. Again, more wine. And then they took off again. So at this point, this is where things start to go the wrong way.
Oh no.
Oh no. So the Echo goes west, and the Medusa starts going south by southwest. And they go at this pace again, they're fast, so they take off and they leave the Echo behind. And they don't put a whole lot of thought into staying with the rest of the fleet. So they go this way for, over 24 hours. And then the two helpers to the captain realize that they're off course. And the captain asks them, okay, so what should we do to get back on course? And they say, oh, Captain, don't worry. We can see the Cape over there in the distance. Well, the rest of the crew didn't quite believe what they were saying. They said, that is not the Cape. Those are clouds.
Is this the ex-con saying, oh my gosh, no. There's a cape over there?
Yeah, so the ex-con who hasn't seen the ocean and these two other guys who are completely unqualified are insisting that they see the cape. And so without using real navigational tools, any maps, why use a compass, right? So they start going towards this so-called cape. Where meanwhile, the rest of the crew is like, that is not a cape. Those are clouds. All right.
I feel like this is like the part of the horror movie where like everything starts to go wrong. You know, like slowly downhill.
Yeah, so it goes wrong.
Uh-oh.
It goes wrong.
Oh.
So when they do that, they start to get in shallow water. And so as they get into, they're starting to see reefs and then, of course, sand. And the ship goes onto a sand barge. And just the front of the ship gets stuck. So at this point, they're like, okay, this isn't too bad. We're just a little bit stuck. So they get the lifeboats out and they start trying to tow it, to pull it out, to get it unstuck from the sand. And as they're doing that, a big wave comes and knocks the back of the boat into the sand, and it breaks the keel of the boat. And then a larger wave comes, puts more pressure on the boat, breaks the hull of the boat, and actually floods the captain's quarters. So the boat's taken on water, but they are just kind of stuck on this sand barge, in kind of shallow water. So it's not like a sinking ship situation. They're just stuck. Okay, they can't get out. They can't go anywhere. They're just stuck. So at this point, they realize that they are going to have to get off the boat and get onto these lifeboats. So the captain starts ordering people to the different lifeboats. And they quickly realize that they don't have enough boats for all the people that are on board. Typical.
That's when
typical.
They have to make the tough decision.
So the captain just kind of, it seems like it's random, but he starts ordering people, back and forth, onto certain boats. And then they realize, okay, the boats are filled. Now what are we going to do? So they decide to make a makeshift raft out of
the remains of the boat.
Okay. So they're taking apart the Medusa. They take the mast off the Medusa, put it on this raft. They take basically, what's the top deck, and they take all the timber from there to make this raft. And the captain orders 150 people.
Out of how many people are on this boat? Like
so 240? There was 240 to start. Okay.
So he puts 150 of them.
150 of them on this raft.
Okay.
But now, as they're building this makeshift raft, there's some time. This is kind of like an overnight thing. A lot of the people had already started to panic. And any guesses of what they did when they were panicked?
I don't know. Throw themselves off the boat?
No, not
really?
Yet. No.
No suicide?
No, not yet.
I don't know. Start pointing the finger,
Okay.
Like when you get nervous and you just blame everyone that's not yourself.
Okay.
Yeah? Maybe?
Any other guesses?
No. Tell me. Just tell me.
Just tell you.
Just rip the Band-Aid off. Tell me what horrors you have in store for me.
Okay. So as they start constructing the raft and as the captain starts ordering people back and forth, several of the sailors got into those barrels of wine.
Ooh, oh my gosh.
Yeah. So a lot of the sailors, were already just very incapacitated. They weren't thinking straight. They couldn't make good decisions at this point. They're exhausted. They're tired. They've been up all night, trying to make this raft, trying to figure out what they're going to do. And so 17 of the original group from the Medusa actually decided to just stay on the ship, on the shipwreck.
Ship?
Well, it's not sinking. I remember just sitting on a sand. So 17 actually just decided to stay with the Medusa, and they chose to not get on any of the lifeboats or the makeshift raft.
Oh.
Well, most of those people that, made that decision were actually passed out drunk or just completely out of their minds at this point. They weren't thinking clearly. So 17 were like, I'm fine.
Yeah.
We're fine. Either they didn't understand what had happened, or they were just past the point of kind of no return. So the captain orders his group, that he wanted, obviously, his family members. All of the women, except for one, got onto the lifeboats. So on the lifeboats, there were 149 men and one woman. The woman had actually been through several wars, and she was married to one of the people that were going on to the raft. So she chose to stay with her husband. She didn't want to just go on the lifeboat. So she made that decision on her own. She had been through tough situations before. She was very brave, and she had been a lot of help to soldiers in previous wars. So she was, felt like she was equipped to go on this raft. So the goal of the raft was, the captain said, okay, we are going to tether our boats. They had 3 other lifeboats. We're going to tether this raft to the lifeboat, and we'll tug you, we'll pull you behind, and we'll get to shore and everything will be fine. Well, one of the people on the raft said, well, wait a second, Captain, we need something to navigate with. And who's going to be on our raft? Are you coming on the raft with us? And he said, oh, yes. I'm coming on the raft with you. He handed them a compass, which was about the size of a coin piece, and a map for navigation. And then the captain said, oh, well, I'm going to be on the raft with you. And he said, I'll be right back. I'm going to go check on some things. The captain disappears. He actually gets on one of the lifeboats, and he takes off.
Oh, surprise.
Surprise. So the people on the raft were already nervous, and they kind of figured out that they were not in the best situation to start this journey.
You think?
So they get going. They take off, and in less than 24 hours after they start, the captain gave orders to cut the ropes to the raft. It was, taking them too long. Remember, there's not motorized lifeboats. They are just rowing with oars.
Okay, but
and sails. They're depending on the sails, and then they're depending on the manpower.
So are they I know the ship is sanded, right?
Right.
So are they near an island or something, or where are they?
They shouldn't have been too far off the coastline, but in reality, they were.
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
So the captain orders for them to cut the rope and take it off. And in later accounts, the captain claimed, he said, oh, no, I didn't cut the rope. A great distance got between us and the raft, and a big wave came, and the tension and the force of the wave broke the rope, and the raft got lost. Yeah.
How convenient.
Total fabrication, because, the people on the raft could actually name the names of the people that were in the lifeboats.
Were they cut them loose? That close?
Yeah, they knew the names of,
oh my gosh. Can you imagine being the person that having to cut 150 people off?
Yeah,
pretty much guaranteeing their death.
Their death would not be.
Oh my gosh, I couldn't live with myself.
Yeah, so at this point, things on the Medusa are, we'll call it the raft. So the things on the raft start to get, obviously, a lot more tense.
you would think
you
so.
Would think. So after they were cut loose, of course, they start going adrift. They're not going in the same direction. They have a sail, but it's not strong enough to really do anything. They're just catching the ocean currents and getting farther and farther and farther out to sea and off course and away from the direction that they should be going. So this raft, what's important to kind of understand is the back of the raft was actually constantly submerged. And then the front of the raft was a little bit higher. So imagine kind of a raft that's at an angle, it's tilted. The back half is just kind of constantly underwater. And really the only safe place for all these people was in the center of the raft. It was standing room only. There's no place to lay down. There's 150 of them just kind of clinging to each other in the center of the raft.
Oh my gosh, that sounds horrible.
And so, of course, storms come, big waves come, and a lot of people either fell off the raft or they chose to jump off the raft at this point because they realized just how horrible this was. And so really only the people at the center of the raft were able to make it. So their numbers went from 150 down to 62 after 4 days. So there's 62 people left. And so now remember, these people that are on the raft, well, yes, they're, supposed to be colonels and they're in the army and all this, but most of them have kind of bad reputations and bad past. Either they were in jail or in prison or, not the best reputations.
They were leaving that place for a reason.
Yes, there was a reason that they were either asked to leave or they were leaving. So, so what happened is basically on the raft, 2 different groups formed. And so,
oh my gosh,
the narrative, they're telling one people that they're the mutineers. So the mutineers they're kind of the bad guys. I'll call them the bad guys from this point on.
The mutineers.
The mutineers. So there was one group that basically they kind of just started to go a little bit crazy. So at this point, they're starting to get dehydrated. They've been out in the sun. They're very sunburned. They haven't had any food. So on this makeshift raft, the only nourishment that made on the raft was, of course, they had gunpowder. And the gunpowder they had actually secured to the top of the mast. So it was dry. It was in a safe place. They kind of moved it up the mast a little bit so it wasn't getting water into it. And then they threw a barrel of kind of like a cornbread in a way. But now when they threw this barrel, the cornbread got wet. So it was wet corn paste. They had several barrels of course, wine. And then they only had 2 casks of water. So things were getting very tense very fast. So what they would do is they said, they were pretty smart from the beginning. They said, okay, we're going to ration out our food. So they would take a kind of like a fistful of this corn paste. They would put some wine on it, and that was their meal. And that was enough to just kind of sustain them for those first couple days of the trip.
Keep them from absolute starvation.
Keep them, from absolute starvation. Of course, wine is dehydrating, so that was probably not the best thing to be drinking out in the open sea.
I didn't think about that.
So they have a little bit at their disposal. They're not completely desolate yet. So
keyword
yet. So the mutineers, they start to get a little bit crazy. So they're dehydrated and they're starting to have some delusions. There's a lot of seasickness going on. They become very angry and, of course, very hungry. You can imagine after 4 days, you're out, you're hot, you're tired, you haven't slept.
I have a question. Did the other group have a name, or were they just the not mutineers?
The not mutineers.
I'm sorry, I can't get over that name. That's just of all the names to pick, let's be the mutineers. Well, that'll show them.
We'll call them the peacekeepers for the thing. They're the peacekeepers. Okay. So the mutineers basically, their only goal was to just start cutting up the raft and just say, okay, we're done. We're going to cut the ropes of the raft, take it apart, disassemble it, and this is we're done, we're gone.
So they took it upon themselves to make that decision for other people.
Yeah. So
gosh, at that point, just throw yourself off the raft. You crazy.
So a lot of that happened. So several people got thrown overboard in this kind of revolution, this little revolt that was happening on the ship, or on the raft, and. The only thing they brought with them, they had their hand pistols. They didn't bring their large guns, but they did have their swords with them. They had bayonets, their swords with this, and they also had some axes, some hand axes.
Fun.
So things were not pleasant, and several people, were either thrown overboard or just jumped off in the chaos of this. And so there was a moment of just kind of peace. And during the narrative, this is actually one of my favorite parts. So it says, the mutineers, being repulsed, as we have said above, left us at this moment a little repose. The moon with her sad beams illumined the fatal raft, this narrow space in which were united so many heart-rending afflictions, so many cruel distresses, a fury so incident, a courage so heroic, the most pleasing and generous sentiments of nature and humanity.
Is that a quote from something?
Yeah, this is directly from the narrative with Senegal. Not from Senegal. Yeah, that the surgeon wrote and an engineer. These were from 2 survivors of the boat. They wrote this narrative.
Okay.
After. So you can see that in the middle of this kind of just awful, awful situation,
Did something happen, or did they just decide to like chill out for a second?
They just stopped for a little bit. They just stopped, and of course, they came back even stronger the second time. But this kind of revolting stopped a little bit, and then at one point, one of the so-called, I guess, peaceful ones was able to get the main kind of mutineer thrown off the raft. So he took care of that, and then after that point, things settled down for them for a moment. So at this point, after they have the kind of rebels going on and all this chaos, things get a little bit more bleak. I'm going to go back a little bit on this one.
Technical difficulties.
There we go. We'll start here. So things get a little bit more bleak. Their numbers kind of cut in half again. So we go from 62 till they have different numbers. So in the narrative, he said basically
so like 30 or something.
Yeah, he said it's at the point now where you can imagine there's a lot of sickness. There's just kind of people laying there.
Like the trauma.
Yeah, you're not sure if they're alive or if they're not. So the group that's left, this is kind of on day 8. The group that's left, they have to make a decision of what they're going to do. They resorted to all sorts of really kind of things that no human would ever really want to have to do.
Oh, no,
okay,
no,
you're weak.
No.
Don't pass out. Yeah. So,
oh my gosh.
There was some cannibalism. Oh, I know. And
light cannibalism.
Yeah. Well, they were able to make kind of a fire out of a can. Remember, they had gunpowder, so somehow they got that lit. I'm not sure how, but they were able to
roast people.
Oh, yeah.
I don't even want to think about that.
Okay, don't pass out. Breathe. So yeah, they did. But then one smart, probably the engineer, I'll put my best on him, but one person actually had the idea of, well, wait a second, what if we take some of our sailcloth, dip it down into the ocean, and try to catch some fish? So that person actually was successful. They were able to.
They caught some fish.
Yeah, they caught some fish. So it wasn't just that they had. Yes, so they did have some fish to eat. And now the other thing that was available to them, they noticed that there were a lot of sharks swimming near the raft, and of course they tried unsuccessfully to catch a shark. Of course, they wouldn't have.
Are you serious? Why would you want to catch a shark? I mean, I guess they're starving.
You're desperate, but they wouldn't have the power to pull them.
Okay. So the survivors that like wrote the narrative, right? Did they? Okay, I'm kind of like morbidly fascinated at this moment. Did they get cannibals, or were they like disgusted by it? Did it say anything, or?
Oh no, they were completely repulsed. So there were some that actually refused. Some were like, no, I'd rather die than do that.
Yeah. I mean, that's so like animal.
Yeah, and then some of them just were like at the point where, we want to survive.
Starving.
Yeah. But so their numbers had dwindled, and so at this point, the group that was still kind of fairly able to walk and think as straight as they could, they made a decision. They said, okay, well, we have enough rations, we have enough wine to last us about 48 more hours. And their water had actually been lost in one of the little fights on the top of the raft, so their water was gone.
Did somebody like throw the water off?
Yeah. So at this point,
crazy.
Their corn was gone and their water was gone, so they're down to just like I think one barrel of wine, and then the flesh. And so,
did you have to say the flesh like that?
Sorry.
Ew.
So they made a decision. A very tough decision to actually anyone that was sick or injured. Remember, they had swords and axes and lots of things. So a lot of people were wounded, very gravely injured, or had broken limbs. And so they made the decision that anyone that was injured or wounded to, send them to the sea. But what's interesting is in the narrative, the surgeon, he writes about this moment, and I encourage everyone to go and read this narrative, because this is kind of one of those moments in humanity where he's making this choice of, who is going to go on with him. Like, he's making this life and death decision for these people. And he describes the moment, and he actually writes this beautiful, beautiful kind of thank you letter to the one woman that was on the raft. He wrote about her, and he wrote about her everything good that she had done, all her campaigns and all the people that she had helped. And she was one of the injured ones. She had a broken leg, and her husband was also gravely injured. He had a wound to his head. And so surgeon...
They had survived this far?
They had survived this far. And she had actually been thrown into the ocean twice and rescued up until this point during these kind of revolts. So she had made it. But she was gravely injured, and so was her husband. And so the group had made the decision that she was one of the ones that was going to be tossed over to the sea. And he wrote about her, and he took the time to understand her campaigns and, and the wars that she had been in and the people that she had helped. And it was just this beautiful, beautiful description of her life, and what she did and what she stood for. And so you see this humanity coming out of such a dark moment. And I really I'll have the link to the Gutenberg narrative, so you can read it for yourself. But
interesting.
It's very interesting and very fitting. So this wasn't just something that was done in haste. So you need to understand the people on the raft, were upset. They were sad. There was humanity behind it. It wasn't just, every man for himself. Is the opposite of the captain. Okay, so these people were making a decision. Opposite. So at this point, after they sent the injured and the sick into the sea, there was only 15 remaining. So there's 15 that are left, and this is kind of the 8th day. They make it a whole nother week after the 8th day, after they made the decision to send those overboard. So the 15 made it an additional 7 days. And right as they're about to lose hope, they see the glimmer of a ship off in the distance. And so they gather up their handkerchiefs and whatever cloth they have. At this point, there's really, their clothes are gone. They're sunburned. There's just not a whole lot left. The raft is starting to break apart. It's much smaller than it was. They climb up on the barrel of wine and on each other, and they're waving their, bandana, their flag, to try to signal this ship. And what's important is this is the moment that Gericault decided to paint. Okay, is this epic moment of when they see a ship coming and they start having this hope, and they're waving the flag and they're so excited, but then the ship disappears. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's the ultimate disappointment.
And so once again, they go into despair. So what they do is they kind of make a tent out of their cloth that's on the ship, and they resolve themselves. They said, okay, well, we're probably going to die in our sleep tonight. This is the end. That was our last hope. We're not going to make it any further. Our wine is gone. We're at the end. And so they decide in that last night to tell each other about everything that they did, and a lot of them were very devoted to their country. So they're devoted to France, and most of them, their last regret was that they didn't die on the battlefield. Said, oh, how I've been through all these battles, I've done all these things, and here I am. This is how I'm going to go out. I'm going to just die on this raft in the middle of nowhere. And so they had a lot of regret that they, didn't die in a more valiant manner. So they spent their last night just telling their stories of, where they had been, where they had traveled, who their family was, and everything that they loved about their country, about France. And they were so devoted to their country and to, their people. And that was how they chose to spend that night. Well, the sun came up the next day, and one of the passengers of the raft went out of kind of their little makeshift tent, and the Argus was right there. the Argus had found them and
Yay.
rescued them, and the captain of that ship actually got in a lifeboat and came directly to them, and he helped each person off the raft, all 15, onto the lifeboat, and then onto the main ship, the Argus. So they immediately got help. Yeah, they immediately got help, and they got them back to the shore. But unfortunately, out of the 15, only 10 survived the next couple of days because some of them were too fatigued, too far gone, or too ill or injured, and they didn't survive their injuries. So we are going to pause there. So this is the end of part 1. And then part 2, we're going to go into the painting.
There's a part 2?
There's a part 2.
Oh my gosh, she didn't
There's
tell
more.
me about this.
There's more. And you have to find out what happened to the other 2 ships. Remember, there's more ships. And then the lifeboats and the captain.
Oh, yeah.
And what happened to them.
I forgot about them.
Yeah. So we're going to pause here for just a second, and then we will start part 2. All right, so welcome back to part 2 of the Raft of Medusa from If This Canvas Could Talk with Amber Jordan.
And Anna Halza. Hey, I'm back. We're back.
She's back. She's had brownies, so I think she's going to live now.
Yeah.
So again, we're in the middle of this kind of crazy time, and literally sitting in our closet and just trying to, find a way to tell some interesting stories and get a break from the news and what's going on. So
do something with our prolonged time.
Yeah. So there's just a lot that we could be doing with our time, but for some reason I decided to
look up stories about cannibalism. Yay!
Good choice. Maybe not the best, but there's a happy ending. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm ready. Always ready for happy endings.
Always ready for happy endings.
Yeah.
As happy as it could be. We'll go from there.
As happy as 15 people can get, I guess.
15 people could get. All right. So we left off where our 15 passengers from the Raft of Medusa were rescued by the Argus. And I looked it up because I couldn't remember the names of the other ships. So the Argus was one, the Echo, and then the Flute were part of the fleet.
Yeah, they were the mini ships.
They were
off of
the smaller ships. So there's the brig and then a corvette. And they're all different types of boats. But the Medusa was the largest one, so it had the most people on it. So it was the Argus
that
saved them. But what's interesting is when the Argus had gotten ashore originally, and the captain was there at the shore, the original directions for the Argus were not to go rescue the people on the raft of the Medusa or to go back to the original shipwreck location to check on the other 17. That was not the instruction from the captain. The captain actually had instructed the Argus to continue going down along the shoreline to go to their original destination further down the coastline. And the captain of the Argus, once he had heard about what had happened, refused. And so they went out on their own, denied the captain's orders, thankfully, and went out on their own to go get the people from the ship.
On the raft?
Mm-hmm.
Oh my gosh.
So the Argus was kind of in direct defiance of, the captain, and they went on their own. Now, what about the captain and the other people that were on
the Medusa?
Yes, so the ones that went off on the lifeboats, they made it to shore, but unfortunately, they didn't get to, their intended port, obviously. And they ended up in a spot where they ended up in desert. So Africa, West Africa is not the best places. And they kind of had a similar story as those on the raft, but you can imagine just kind of the opposite of being in a very hot desert climate without a lot of food and rations. So most of them actually ended up meeting a similar fate. Their story was just a little bit different than the ones on the raft. So all around it was
they didn't get painted, so
so
really
there.
Yeah.
Revenge on that.
Those ropes.
So speaking of that, so we're going to go and move on to Gericault and the painting, the art part. So yay. So I am a bit of an art nerd, art history nerd in particular. I get really, really excited. So as a parent once told me that I'm kind of like a kid in a candy shop when I go into an art museum. It's a little bit difficult to keep up with me because I want to see so many different paintings with, as much time as I have.
And you don't stop talking about all of those paintings.
And I do. I get very, very excited, and I bounce around. So, like the National Gallery of Art, we only had a couple of hours, and
oh my gosh,
that
was intense.
It was a forced march through there, but we did it, and I wanted to hit the highlights, and we managed. But that's
and Da Vinci.
But that's the thing where I think kind of a normal person that just goes to an art gallery, they may know a lot about art history, or they may recognize a lot of paintings, but as they're walking around the gallery, sometimes you forget to just pause in front of one painting and really take it in and really understand. But the more that you know about the stories behind it and the artists behind each painting, it makes it that much more of an experience. Mm-hmm. So Gericault, he is probably one of my favorites. And the reason that I would say he's one of my favorites is because of his passion. So with this, obviously, this is a very distressing story. In art, during this time, so we're in the about 1818 at this point in time. So the shipwreck was a couple of years before it was modern news, and the paintings before this were something called neoclassical. So neoclassical means new classical, and they were stories from ancient Rome. So all the old stories from ancient Rome were popular again in Greece, and so that
movement.
Yeah, so that movement was what came before this. And now this particular painting is really, really important to art history. Basically, what Gericault managed to do was he started the entire next movement. So with the Raft of Medusa, so before this we have our neoclassical. So if you think of the David and Oath of Herati, those type of they're very refined paintings. They have more color, and then along comes Gericault, and he's painting a modern event, and that hadn't happened before. So up to this point, the paintings were of stories from a long time ago. They were myths, mythology, or they were icons, religious in nature. But no one had done this before. No one had taken something basically out of a newspaper and then painted it. So this was a new thing. No one had done this before. Now, Gericault, what inspired him was he read the narrative that I've been talking about. So the narrative of the surgeon and the engineer, two of the survivors out of that last 15. And they wrote this narrative to really kind of place the blame on the captain. They wanted justice for all the people on the boat, and they wanted their story to be heard. And so Gericault read this narrative, and he was so moved by it, and it's set by this, and he really wanted to kind of make a statement, and he didn't want people to just forget about this event and move on from this event. He wanted to make a point, He wanted to show just how bad things were, and he didn't want people to forget. And that's what inspired him to do this. So Gericault was a bit of a character. Up until this point, he was very young, so he was only in his late 20s when he started to paint this painting. And up before this point, he had studied with most of the masters. So he had learned from the best. So he went to the Louvre. He actually got kicked out and was forbidden from coming back to the Louvre for some of his behavior. But anyway, he also spent time copying and learning about the different paintings. So Rembrandt, for one, Rubens, Velasquez. After a trip to Italy, he began to take on the different elements from Caravaggio and Michelangelo's work. Mm-hmm. Caravaggio, in particular, really inspired him. So I hear Anna's going,
Caravaggio!
So Caravaggio was also a bit of a madman. That's another episode for another day.
Oh, boy.
But Caravaggio's work was very dramatic. So we have, the fluid and the dark and the light and
very
tenebroso and intense and very moody, and the subject matter was mostly biblical in nature, but it was the way his style was very dramatic with the lights and the darks. And so Gericault was inspired by this. He took a lot of that kind of Baroque and brought it into his work. And so especially with the nature and the emotion behind this painting, he really wanted to bring in some of that dramatic and that light. So he purposely chose to paint this painting kind of with the browns. Let's move on to the painting so you can see it. So it's not the screen. The painting itself has a lot of kind of yellows and browns and greens. He did this on purpose. He wanted to make the skin, in particular, the people, remember they're, dying people, they're not healthy or well in any manner. So he really wanted to make this point. Again, so his friends started to say that he was a madman. And the reason that they said that is he actually set up his studio directly across from a hospital. I know, yeah. So what he would do is he would actually go to the morgue and he would study dead bodies. And
oh my gosh.
Anna's gonna faint. She had a brownie. She should be okay.
Hey.
So he would go and he would study the skin of the dead bodies and what their faces look like, and the rigidness of their skin and the stiffness of their skin, and
that's like part of the reason why it looks so.
And he even,
lifelike.
he had made trips to an insane asylum, and he actually went and he would practice and he would draw the faces of the patients there at the insane asylum. He wanted to get it right. He would research and research and research to get his painting as accurate as possible. He relied the most on the accounts from the two survivors, so from the surgeon and the engineer. He mostly used their account of what happened to inspire him for the painting. And then Gericault took it a step further. Like, they kept saying he was basically obsessed with this story. So much so that in his studio, he made a makeshift raft. He built a raft. Anna's going, oh my gosh. He built a raft. He would even kind of cling to the mast of the raft to kind of get an idea of what it was like. He brought in his friends to, help him out. And so actually there's a couple of his good artist friends that were used as models for this particular painting. So in the lower left-hand corner, let me go back a slide.
Technical difficulties.
Okay, so pointer. Okay, so this guy right here was actually his assistant. So he was a young teenager that worked for Gericault. and would help him out. So he was actually the model for this particular figure with the dad up here. And then another person, so this guy right here, is actually a famous painter. So Delacroix.
What?
He went on to be a famous painter in his own right, but he actually posed as this guy right here with his head down. So this was Delacroix. So he was very true. He wanted to just really get it right and get the details as accurate as possible, get the pain of the faces. So he would really study those faces from the insane asylum to get just the mood and the feeling of this event, and
artists are like such intense, strange people.
Yeah. So before this, so it's kind of important to understand. So the neoclassical is refined. What Gericault did that was different and new. People up to this point did not compose their paintings this way. You can call it either a triangle. I think of it more as two pyramids. So in this case, he composed it with two pyramids. So we have our mast on one side, with the bodies going over, and then on the other side, where's my pointer? Go back. On the other side, we have this kind of huge difference. So at the bottom of the pyramid, we have our dead, lifeless bodies, and then we move up all the way to the living and our last little symbol of hope. The apexes of the pyramid, so the very top, if you connect them, take it back, and they point to the Argus over here in the distance, the ship off in the distance.
So is that the original ship that they saw, or was it?
Probably. It was probably the Argus, but remember, the Argus was just looking for them.
Okay.
Why is it doing closed captioning? We're learning.
Closed captioning?
I don't need closed captioning. Okay. So the composition of this painting was very deliberate. So he's building up kind of this drama and this mood with these pyramids, and then it directs your vision over here off into the distance. So we have this dark, I need a pointer, so from dark to light, going back and forth. We have the dark over here, all the way to the light of the hope in the distance. So with Romanticism is the period of art that basically was new. So Gericault, this painting, so the Raft of Medusa, is basically the first true French romantic painting. This is the definition of a romantic painting. Now, Romanticism, it's important to understand, Romanticism doesn't mean romantic love in any way. It's more about intuition, emotion, imagination. The tone is spontaneous, kind of nonconformist. The color would be deep, rich shades. The subject matter is usually nature. Man versus nature is a huge theme in romantic painting. So if you see something where a human is in danger from some kind of force of nature, odds are it's a romantic painting. The genre is kind of a narrative of a heroic struggle. So there's always usually some kind of big epic battle going on. There's some kind of struggle. In this case, it's, a struggle for not only life, but for their humanity and for their hope. So there's a huge range of emotion in this painting. So we're going from death and despair all the way to hope and life, all in one painting. And that was new. No one had seen that before. So this painting was first exhibited in the Paris Salon in 1819. And Gericault, the original name of it was just The Shipwreck. He knew that by displaying this in France, that it might not be well received right away. And he was actually accurate. So he painted this in a way where the raft was kind of right at the level of the viewer to the point where when you're standing there, it almost feels as if you could just step onto the raft. This painting is huge. It's very important to understand, here we go, how large this painting is. So it's 16 feet tall by 23 feet wide. If you notice, it's hung down a little bit lower, so down here, a little bit lower, to really put the viewer right at the base, at the bottom of this painting, so you get the whole dramatic effect. That was done on purpose. That is not a mistake. That is not the Louvre just picking a height and hanging it. That was all done on purpose. But when it was first exhibited, it wasn't well received. And actually to the point where Gericault was kind of despondent about it. Because remember, he had been obsessed with this story, and he had been obsessed with this painting, and he had, become a madman. He set up a studio right across the street from the hospital just so he could have access to go look at dead bodies. I mean, he was obsessed with this. And then when it wasn't well received right away, he obviously was very despondent. It's said that he actually took it out of the frame and rolled up the canvas. And then he said, well, I'm just going to have to do better. He wasn't angry at the viewers. He was angry at himself because he thought, he was a perfectionist. Remember, he's obsessed. He wanted to get it right. He thought that he needed to make it better. Luckily, some of his artist friends said, well, you know what? Maybe France isn't the best place to display this painting for the first time. Why don't you try it in Great Britain? And so he did. So he tried it again, and he did another exhibition in Great Britain. And it actually became very, very popular, and it sold out. And Gericault actually made a great deal of money because he would get paid. He would get half the money from the tickets and from the exhibition, from the door sales. So it was very successful in Britain. And then at that point in time, he gained notoriety. And that's when he kind of crossed the line from being, he was well known, but not super famous before this point. And then he crossed the line and was considered a master after this painting. He got what he wanted, and he got that fame and notoriety, and he got the message out there. The captain was actually arrested. So all of
because of the painting?
Not just because of the painting. The narrative was the main thing that got it. But the painting did help keep it in the public's eye. So remember, back then, we didn't have Facebook, and we didn't have Twitter. We didn't have all these ways to get these stories or these headlines out. There wasn't wasn't a CNN, ticker down at the bottom to say, oh, the captain was arrested today for, his role in the deaths of, the mass murder of all these people. They didn't have that. And so Gericault played a really pivotal role in getting the public's attention with this and kind of making a statement and getting them angry and riled up to get that justice that the passengers on the Medusa deserved. So he was very, very important in getting it right and in fixing it, making it better. One thing that's important to kind of understand about this painting is the passion behind it. So Gericault was kind of the beginning of this entire movement. So the Romanticism was all about the power of passion. And during this time, people started getting interested in kind of dark things and gothic stories and ghost stories. Anna, do you have any guesses of maybe a book that was written about this time?
Frankenstein?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
So Frankenstein.
Yeah, the Gothic era.
Yeah.
Like in literature.
Right.
Oh my gosh, that was pretty intense.
Yeah, so
the entire public and kind of society changed.
Yes.
So that looking for horror.
And what's kind of interesting is that Mary Shelley actually started writing Frankenstein in 1816. So the same year that all this happened, and she actually published it in 1818, which is the same year that this came to exhibition. So it's kind of fascinating. So she actually wrote Frankenstein. There was bad weather, and her family was locked inside for an extended period of time, and they started telling ghost stories. And so during that time, they were telling ghost stories, and she...
It started out of like a contest between her husband and Lord Byron.
Yes.
And hers just took off from a short story and turned into this great novel that I love so much.
Yeah. So this,
which is really interesting.
So it's important to understand that the Romanticism isn't just one painting; it's an entire movement. So the kind of what was popular during that time. So having, a knight in armor in your living room would have been the popular decor of the time. So it's. It was the in-decorating look, so the arms and armor, Gothic-style castles, and it was just medieval tales and romances and Gothic horror stories and just all these
dark things,
architectures and towers and different things. This is what became popular during this time period. So this painting fit in very, very well with this new movement, and because it was the opposite. So all movements, like a Romanticism, is kind of a revolt against what came before. So what came before was the neoclassical, which was very refined in telling the stories of, ancient Rome and ancient Greece, and, we're all prim and proper, and everything from ancient Rome was popular again. Everyone wanted columns and, they so and vases and pottery.
Like each movement of art is like a rebellion of the
one before. Yeah, so Gericault, he really, with this painting, started an entire movement. He was the first. And so that's why when you see this painting, the Raft of Medusa, we can kind of say it's basically, the crown jewel of the Romantic movement. And that's why, because he was the first. It was new. No one had ever done this before. It was shocking to the public. Obviously, it wasn't just shocking because of, obviously the subject it's very shocking, but it was shocking because it was a modern event. It was only at this point, a couple years before that the real shipwreck had happened. So this was shocking to the people. I mean, you can imagine, someone in Paris.
I suppose they wouldn't be as used to as we are to receiving that kind of intel about what's going on in the world.
Well, we're pretty numb today. We're so used to. Obviously, you can look at our world right now. We have a major pandemic going on, and it's easy to just kind of forget that these are real people, and they have lives, and they're human beings, and there's humanity behind it. And I think for the first time, Gericault, he did something that put a horrific event right in front of people's faces, and he forced them to look at it and forced them to realize that, there's bad people in the world, and that captain was a very, very bad person. And a lot of bad happened on that raft. But he also didn't want to just focus on the bad. He wanted to focus on the good. So especially in the narrative, again, of, the woman and all the good that she did. But then this moment of hope and showing that in his painting. So we're gone from the darkest depths of despair. These people have experienced every range of emotion. They think they're going to die. They've resigned themselves to hiding in their tent, and they're like, okay, well, maybe we'll be lucky and we'll fall asleep and pass away in our sleep. And so he's captured this story and this emotion, this wide range of just human emotion and their voyage of their ups and their downs and everything they go to. But his final point, it's not to focus on the death and to focus on the destruction. He wants you to focus up here on the hope. He wants you to focus on the light. He wants you to focus on the humanity of they made it. They made it. Yeah. And not only did they make it, but there's always hope, and there's always the light. And that was his point. Gericault's point was to show that humans, are resilient. We can do it.
It's like Martin Luther King Jr. said, out of a mountain of despair, a stone of hope. Yeah, just tied that right in there.
Yeah, there's a lot of that. So
it's a common theme, and it's important, and it should be retold.
Yeah, and I think especially in our kind of current situation, I mean, we're sitting here in our closet. We haven't left in days, and
we haven't seen our friends.
Yeah. And you do feel isolated and alone. And obviously, you can't compare to this kind of situation, but there is always hope, and there is always something, on the horizon that's coming, that's going to be good, and it's going to be better, and there's going to be people out there that will, like an engineer and a surgeon were survivors in this story. So kind of like our current events going on, there's people out there that are helping, and there's people out there that are coming up with new solutions and fixing things and coming up with new ideas
and being resilient. Like those people did on that raft.
So it's good. So I wanted to just end with that, with Gericault. Positive note. Gericault. One more sad thing. You want to hear one more sad thing?
Oh, goody. Yes, please.
Please.
Yeah.
Oh, well,
we couldn't end it on
can't
a
end it on
positive note.
There's always one more twist in the story. Always.
That's ridiculous.
So Gericault, remember he's a bit of a madman, and he gets obsessed with things.
Like all good artists.
Like all good artists, but some of his earlier subject matter was actually horses, and he would paint military and military campaigns, but he was mostly fascinated by the horses. And so Gericault actually passed away when he was only 32 years old. He passed away because he died from a couple of, injuries sustained from a riding accident. But it was a riding accident. He was trying to basically kind of like jump on the horse without a saddle, very not thinking.
Wait, so he just like launched onto the horse and hoped for the best?
Yeah, and not a very wise choice. But he was always looking for a rush and looking for a thrill, and so that's actually, he only had 12 years of really being kind of a famous artist and having his work out there. So he had a very short life. And the Raft of the Medusa was basically kind of his crowning achievement. But out of this, his friend Delacroix actually kind of picked up the torch where Gericault left. And Delacroix went on. And you probably heard of the painting lady leading the people. Very famous.
Oh, yes, definitely. I like that painting.
And so he picked up, so his friend actually carried on for Gericault and kept it going and created his own masterpieces after learning from Gericault. So you never know what influence you're having on people. All right, guys. Well, thanks for hanging in there with us for our very first editions of If This Canvas Could Talk.
Woot a woot.
Who knows if there'll be a second one, but as long as I'm stuck in a closet, I might as well do something with my time, and I enjoy art history, so I hope you got something out of this. If there is a particular painting that you are interested in learning more about, or even an artist or a movement, let me know. I'll put kind of an email in some of the notes, and you can contact me, send me what you're interested in learning, and maybe I can help you out. So hopefully you're not sitting in your closet eating brownies like we are, but if you're, out, up and about, cleaning the house, I know, doing laundry, all sorts of fun things that we are doing during our time. If you're interested in learning something new, let me know, and maybe I can help you out. Anyway, guys, have a good one, and we will be talking at you soon.
Bye!